Hi, I'm Aiden. This is MAHP Podcast, and a little bit about me. I'm a senior here at U of I, and I'm an economics major, and we kind of wanted to talk about different issues going on in the world related to digital humanities.
Hi, I'm Pratham. I'm a second semester senior here as well, and I am a geographic information science major.
Hi, I'm Marina. I'm a junior. I'm studying sociology.
Hi, I'm Hannah, and I'm a sophomore double majoring in psychology and information sciences.
Okay. So just to talk a little bit more on the creation of our podcast, it was inspired by our initials and our focus on global issues. We created MAP to discuss inequalities within the digital humanity realm, and we believe that by using this as our platform, many people are able to perceive and utilize the information we provide to better the world. We also believe that because of our different backgrounds, we develop an interdisciplinary approach, which has been seen to foster critical thinking and just bridge gaps between our knowledge. Aiden, did you want to?
Yeah, for sure. So today, we're going to be diving into a little bit about the digital divide. For those who don't know what that means, it's kind of like the growing gap between those who have access to modern digital technologies and those who don't. It's especially stark between developed and developing countries for sure. While some enjoy like seamless connectivity and cutting edge tools, others are still trying to access basic digital infrastructure. This divide isn't about internet speed. It's more so about education as well as like the ability to participate in the digital world. We each found some statistics or facts that stuck with us, so we're going to share them and then kind of chat through them and discuss how we feel about it.
Yeah, so the first statistic is something that I found. This stuck out to me during my initial research, and it came from the International Telecommunication Union, which reported that there were around 2.6 billion people that still remained unconnected to the internet as of 2023. Doing the math, that's just about a third of the entire world's population, and this number isn't exactly shrinking at a pace in which we shouldn't be worried. The thing is that most of these people are in developing regions, specifically sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, and this tells us that although we are seeing an assortment of technological advancements, there's still this parallel reality in which large numbers of people are excluded from what is considered our normal. That is not just an inconvenience, rather a serious problem that directly affects everyday factors such as education, employment, and healthcare. At this point, it should be easy to say that this is a human rights issue and not just a tech issue.
Yeah, for sure. I would totally agree. And what really strikes me about that is how normalized our hyper-connected lives have become, especially like living in America for the most part. Like we stream lectures, work remotely, stay updated 24/7, whether that's social media or just contacting through messages, email, whatever it may be. And there's a huge chunk of the world that doesn't have basic access. That's not just a tech gap, that's a life gap, in my opinion. And it's really telling that most of these unconnected areas overlap with regions already facing economic and political changes or challenges. It's like a compounding disadvantage, and we don't talk about that enough.
Yeah, I agree with Aiden for sure about the compounding disadvantage. And additionally, I feel like the big issue with the digital divide is, even though it might be shrinking in some ways, it's going to be growing in other ways at the same time. I know a lot of pretty recent policies have been focusing on getting laptops and other devices out to countries that don't have access and students that don't have access, and that's a really great initiative. But meanwhile, people in developed countries are already using AI as the next big thing in technology, which will probably take much longer to reach those developing countries. So if technology continues to grow so exponentially, it almost feels like the gap is never going to be closed 100%.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the fact that this divide is in between developing and developed countries, but I also thought that one of the most shocking things for me was the fact that it also exists in the most developed countries. For example, here in the US, I read several articles that talked about how like Latino and African American populations in the US are disproportionately not able to access the internet, and once they do, they aren't fully prepared on navigating it.
Yeah, I actually wanted to bring up a statistic that's related to that because I know we've been mostly focusing on the digital divide in terms of developing nations, and that's definitely how most people would define the digital divide. But as technology becomes an everyday tool that basically makes or breaks people's quality of life, even in developed countries, I feel like the definition of a digital divide can be changed or applied differently. Studies from the Stanford and North Carolina medical institutions have shown that there's actually a growing digital divide in developing countries between older and younger people. Older adults are already socially isolated and have a reputation for being bad with technology, but now that technology is essential for almost everything, that reputation accelerates social isolation, which increases risk for premature death almost as much as physical issues such as smoking or obesity. Some older adults don't even have access to regular internet within their own homes, something that might seem impossible to live without to us. The main issue, however, is the fact that older adults also have less access to health services without technological literacy. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of medical institutions moved many of their services online, and while it is true that you can still get these services in person, it's hard for older adults with physical health problems to leave their homes, especially if they live on their own. A lot of states in the US have begun rolling out policies to educate older adults on tech and trying to keep their needs in mind. But honestly, I don't know if these policies will help them keep up with how fast new technology is constantly being pushed out and discovered.
Yeah, I didn't think of linking medical disparities to technological literacy, but I think it definitely makes sense. During COVID, the only way to get quick updates on events was literally through technology, whether it was phones, the news, social media, or text messages. Like, people that were working within the health field, like on the back, were basically going online, giving firsthand accounts and details to what was happening. And that's really valuable information that isn't being accessed by everyone. With my grandparents, at least, like, they'd like to learn, but they bring up how they're always too stuck in their ways and it's too complicated for them to try.
Yeah, for sure. So something that I found really interesting about Hannah's point was I think a lot of the time we forget that the digital divide isn't just a global north versus global south issue. It actually shows up within developed countries in ways that are just as serious. The idea that older adults are being left behind, not just socially, but in terms of healthcare access, it's kind of alarming, like especially when you consider how fast tech is evolving. I know it sometimes feels overwhelming to keep up sometimes, but we grew up with it, sorry.
Yeah, and similar to what Aiden just said, like, I think that this highlights how it's important to take a deeper look at the digital inequality from more than just the geographic perspective. Even when considering the same country or the same city, individuals have completely different experiences based on their age, income, and education level. And the stakes here become really high as technology slowly becomes a huge part of how we as humans access basic needs, including applying for jobs or even something as simple as staying in touch with your family. So when we discuss digital access, we are also expanding on inclusion in society.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up the fact that there's different experiences. One of the most concerning and probably disturbing facts I found was one I read in a paper about sociology and the digital divide, where it talked about how having internet access at home while attending school allowed students to earn up to $2 million more than unconnected students over their lifetime. So the issue is not limited to who has access, but also what that access provides you with. The statistic emphasizes the internet access is directly correlated with higher income, meaning that these people with access have more financial stability, while developing countries are struggling to keep up. This is a clear class struggle, as the lack of inclusion for developing countries in this social networking and professional development realm via internet only widens the increasing wealth gap. I also read that you are 25% more likely to quickly find a job if you're using internet access when compared to those using in-person methods of job searching. In other words, the internet and a lack of it is so much more than just a connection to other people, but also to a secure future and professional connections.
Yeah, so I actually read that the digital divide is really harmful to both income inequality and the overall economies of countries with less digital access, because companies that require a lot of digital work aren't going to look for people in these countries, aren't going to establish branches in these countries. They're going to look in regions where everyone is really familiar with technology. So this also makes it a lot harder for still developing countries to get out of that economically low place, which caused the divide to occur there in the first place.
Yeah, I think the statistic that Marina brings up really drives home how digital access isn't just about minuscule ideas that don't ultimately matter, like being able to scroll on Instagram. It is also interconnected with your education, your ability to get a job, and your future income. I think it also highlights how technology is important when it comes to the upward mobility, or the lack of it emphasizes its importance. The fact that having internet access can potentially translate to millions more in lifetime earnings is a direct way of displaying how this gap feeds into the much more prominent cycle of inequality.
Yeah, I could 100% agree with Pratham's statement. I also think what makes Marina's stat so disturbing is how early the gap starts. We're not just talking about people entering the workforce, we're talking about kids. A student without home internet is basically being cut off from essential resources before they even have a chance to compete. And what's wild is that we're not just seeing an access issue, it's an outcome issue. This is about lifelong consequences. And then when you connect it to what Pratham said earlier, it paints a clear picture. This isn't just a digital divide, it's an economic divide, a generational divide, and honestly, a systemic one. So when we talk about solving the digital divide, we're not just talking about routers and towers, we're talking about building equity from the ground up. And this kind of drives into like the economic divide. I found this study from the World Bank that shows that in low-income countries, only 10% of schools that are connected to the internet that only 10% of schools are connected to the internet. That has huge implications for education, especially for kids trying to compete in a tech-driven world. This is very wild to me because for the most part, my education has had some sort of integration of technology dating back to kindergarten, whether it was smart boards in classrooms or computer labs during library. It's something we take for granted, but once you really look into it, you realize how fortunate we are to be a part of a well-resourced and advantaged education system.
Yeah, I think that the percentage that is only 10% of schools in low-income countries having internet access is absolutely absurd. I think that this statistic alone should speak numbers on how unrealistic it is to expect students across the globe to compete in a digital economy when they don't have the proper tools to get started. The worst part of this is that this educational crisis sets kids back for the rest of their lives. The way I think about it is like trying to run a marathon with both of your shoes tied together. Although it is not impossible to cross the finish line, it is certainly much more difficult to reach the end line in a timely manner.
Yeah, this also has me rethinking about COVID again, because this is where these disparities were really highlighted. For instance, if you lived in communities that generally had less stable access to the internet, you had no way of really accessing your Zoom classes or doing remote work. It's like you can't function as part of society when everything else is on hold out there. I can only relate to the experiences of the US, and thinking of these other developing countries as an excluded part of this social network online is really concerning.
Yeah, I feel like we, living in a developed country, think having regular access to technology is something we can't live without anymore, especially after growing up surrounded by it. When I think about it, it's hard to say I could go even 24 hours without using some sort of technology, but then you realize there's so many people out there who maybe grow into adults having never used a phone or a computer, or at least not ones like we have right now. I think it's also an eye-opening kind of statistic because it feels like we can say we are at the forefront of the technological revolution. Everyone has technology now, but that doesn't apply everywhere. It only applies to developing countries and where we are in the US. So this kind of makes you realize that we need to work on bringing everyone up to this level, and that it honestly should be way more of a priority than it is now.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And then we're going to kind of subsection this too. We found a question online, and we all find it super interesting, and we're all going to kind of say our point on it and why we feel this way. So the question was, what do you all think is the most important first step towards closing the digital divide?
Yeah, so I think the most important first step toward closing the digital divide is to emphasize the implementation of affordable and reliable digital infrastructure, specifically in these underserved regions. This sticks out to me as the most important aspect just because without the physical infrastructure like mobile towers and broadband networks, there's no possibility of this divide closing.
I think more global collaboration across different fields and sectors is necessary, especially to target certain groups of people that might be more in need of certain services than others. The World Economic Forum is currently running the Edison Alliance, which aims to reduce costs and spread out internet access to underdeveloped areas of the world by combining innovators in healthcare, finance, education, and other fields. An example is the NCD app used in Ghana, because there's a severe lack of healthcare access and affordability in the entire African continent, but this project lets patients monitor their health remotely. Solutions like these combine efforts by the government and private companies, which Edison Alliance aims to increase even more. I think if more large technology companies across the world partnered with governments of both developed and still developing countries, these combined efforts can get a lot more done because they have economic backing and experts in the field, as well as bringing in professionals from other fields like healthcare if they want to push initiatives targeting countries that need more access to healthcare, for example. Overall, I think one answer, what maybe not the answer, is to focus on specific initiatives in each country or continent so you aren't trying to do too much at once, and use combined efforts from governments, tech companies, and specific experts in that field.
For me, I think it starts with infrastructure. I think laying the groundwork to physically connect people. Something interesting I found was that implementing internet access in these developing countries can significantly boost economic growth by fostering productivity, and it also enables new business opportunities. Ultimately, that in turn contributes more to a more inclusive and dynamic economy. Also, the internet's potential to boost productivity and employment is well documented. I actually found a study that was across 14 countries, including Brazil and Rwanda, found that a 10 percentage point increase in a 3G coverage raised the fraction of individuals who are employed by 2.1 percentage points. For example, in Nigeria, mobile broadband allowed workers to find jobs outside of their immediate areas, increasing overall employment. So going back to the question, the apparent time and financially costly action would be countries beginning to invest their funds into the infrastructure of internet access. Also developing policies that promote telecommunications competition, help reduce access charges, and thereby enable more people to use internet service. This fixed cost would massively increase the country's profitability and overall well-being over time.
Yeah, I appreciate all of your points about infrastructure, but just to bounce off that, I also feel like once they do have the initial access to the digital world, we can't just stop there. I read about digital literacy training, which is essentially, do you know how to navigate the internet? Do you know how to upload things, communicate with others? And for those that don't have easily accessible digital opportunities, the chances of them being able to know how to start can be challenging and intimidating. I also had read about like how in Peru and Ecuador, for example, their digital literacy rates were between 5 to 7%.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to kind of wrap things up from here, if you are wondering how you can actually help, you do not need to have power in terms of policy making or even be like a tech genius. Staying informed and sharing that knowledge with those around you can go a long way. And supporting organizations that actively work towards providing internet access and digital literacy training will go to great lengths as well.
So as we've explored today, the digital divide isn't just a matter of who can connect, it's about who gets to participate in society fully. From education to employment, healthcare to opportunity, access to the internet has become a basic need, not a luxury. And yet, billions are still left behind. The conversations we're having here on MAHP are meant to spotlight these inequalities and spark awareness, but we hope they also inspire you to think critically about the systems you benefit from and how you can be part of making them more inclusive. Whether that's supporting digital equity products, advocating for better access in communities, or simply sharing what you've learned, change starts with being informed. Thanks for tuning in.